How does a private company, started by a bunch of merchants looking for profit, end up ruling an entire subcontinent? It sounds completely made up, right? But it's the absolutely incredible true story of the English East India Company and its conquest of India. So let's dive into how a simple quest for money turned into the business of building an empire.
To really get what's going on here, you first have to understand what the grand prize even was. Because before the Europeans showed up in force, India wasn't some backwater. No way. It was a global economic titan.
Just look at this number, 23%. In the middle of the 18th century, India's economy was responsible for nearly a quarter of the entire world's GDP. To put that in perspective, that's more than all of Europe combined. This unbelievable wealth, coming from things like textiles and spices, made India an absolute magnet for traders from all over the globe.
But here's the catch. All this wealth was sitting inside a political system that was starting to crack. The Mughal Empire, the powerhouse that had kept India stable for centuries, was falling apart. After the death of its last great emperor, Aurangzeb, things got messy. Weak rulers, internal fights, it created this massive power vacuum. Local kingdoms started doing their own thing, and all this instability was basically an open invitation for outsiders to come in and try to take advantage. And who sailed right into this volatile scene? You guessed it, the Europeans. But it's so important to remember this. They didn't arrive as invading armies ready for conquest. They came as competing corporations. The Portuguese, the Dutch, the English, the Danish, and the French. And every single one of them wanted a slice of that incredibly rich Indian pie.
The Portuguese were actually the first to get there, setting up their base in Goa. But it didn't take long for others to follow. You had the Dutch, then the English, setting up in key spots like Surat and Madras. Even the Danish got in on the action, and finally you had the French, who made Pondicherry their main hub. Each one was jostling for position, for trade deals, and of course, for profit.
And this map really shows you their initial game plan perfectly. They weren't trying to take over huge chunks of land. Not yet. Instead, they built these fortified trading posts. They called them factories, all along the coast. These little footholds were their commercial hubs, but they also became the flashpoints for intense rivalries, not just with the local Indian rulers, but especially with each other.
Well, as you can probably imagine, that corporate rivalry didn't stay friendly for long. It boiled over into straight-up military conflict. And while there were a few players on the field, the main event, the big heavyweight title fight, was between the English and the French East India Companies. India was about to become one of their primary battlegrounds.
This whole struggle played out across three big conflicts that we call the Carnatic Wars. At first, it was just their wars in Europe spilling over into India. But then they got clever. The companies started meddling in local politics, picking sides when local princes were fighting over a throne. They were basically using Indian rivalries to fight their own proxy war. The final war, though, was the real decider. A huge British victory at the Battle of Wandiwash pretty much slammed the door on French ambitions in India for good.
So why did the English win? I mean, what was their secret sauce? This slide lays it out perfectly. On one side, you've got the English company, a private business, nimble, aggressive, totally driven by profit. On the other, the French company was basically a government department, slower, more bureaucratic. But the real game changer was this. The English were backed by the most powerful navy in the world, the Royal Navy, while the French government was stumbling towards a revolution and just couldn't give its company the support it needed.
With the French pretty much out of the picture, the English East India Company turned its full attention to the single richest prize in all of India, the province of Bengal. And this, right here, is the moment the story pivots. This is where a company that trades becomes a company that rules.
A huge source of the trouble was a little thing called a dastak. You can think of it like a corporate get-out-of-jail-free card for taxes. The Mughal emperor had given the company the right to move its goods without paying local duties. The problem was, company employees started using these dastaks for their own private side hustles, which meant the local ruler of Bengal was losing a fortune in tax revenue, and he was not happy about it.
All this tension exploded at the Battle of Plassey in 1757, and what happened here wasn't really a battle. It was more like a corporate takeover, and it became the blueprint for how the British would conquer India. The British commander, Robert Clive, knew he couldn't win with brute force alone, so he exploited divisions at the Nawab's court and made a secret deal with the Nawab's own top general, Mir Jafar. So when the battle started, Mir Jafar and his huge army just stood there. It was a sham. The Nawab was defeated, and the British installed Mir Jafar as their new puppet ruler.
Now, if Plassey was a victory won through conspiracy and betrayal, the Battle of Buxar 7 years later was the real deal. This was a true military contest. The company's army faced the combined forces of the Mughal emperor himself and 2 other major Indian rulers. There was no betrayal this time, just a straight-up fight. And the British discipline and tactics won the day decisively. This victory proved to everyone that they were now the top military power in the region.
After their victory at Buxar, the company set up this absolutely genius and kind of devious system called dual government. So on paper, the local Nawab was still in charge of running the government, but the British took control of the one thing that really matters, the Diwani, which is the right to collect all the taxes. So think about it. They got all the money and all the power, but none of the responsibility of actually governing. The shift from trader to ruler was now complete.
Okay, so let's zoom out and put all the pieces together. How in the world did a single company manage to do all of this? It wasn't just one single thing. It was this powerful cocktail of factors that gave them an almost unbeatable advantage. First off, you've got the obvious stuff. Their military and tech advantages were just huge. The Royal Navy completely owned the seas, meaning they could resupply their troops and blockade their enemies whenever they wanted. On land, their armies were small but incredibly well-trained and disciplined. Plus, the Industrial Revolution was just getting started back home, giving them a constant edge in technology and production.
But it wasn't just about guns, it was about the systems running in the background. Britain had a stable government, while their main rival, France, was heading for a massive revolution. They had the Bank of England, which gave them a revolutionary way to finance long, costly wars that would have bankrupted other countries. And like we saw, the very structure of the company itself, private, agile, and obsessed with profit, made it a much more relentless and effective machine than its state-controlled competitors.
Which brings us to a final, really fascinating question to think about. The East India Company started as a business. That's it. Its goal was to make money for its shareholders. But along the way, it got its own army, its own navy, and eventually a territory bigger than anything in Europe. So where do you draw the line? At what exact moment does a company's search for profit transform into the business of building an empire?